So the question is, should you be mixing your MIDI drums just as if they were live drums, or should you be treating them in a different way because they're not live drums? Let's discuss. So before we begin this tutorial, I just want to let you know that we live in the absolute best time in history to be a rock or metal musician. We have amazing tools like MIDI drums and amp sims where we can produce fully professional results right within our bedrooms, garages, and even living rooms for that matter. The problem is that so many of us make the same mistakes. And because of this, I put together a free guide called the MIDI Drums and Amp Sims Production Checklist. In this simple and straightforward PDF checklist, I highlight the mistakes that so many of us make and how to get around these mistakes so you can achieve amazing sounding results right within your home studio. Again, the guide is absolutely free and you can have direct access to it right now by clicking the link below in this video's description. Now, on the topic of mistakes, the one mistake that so many of us make when working with MIDI drums is we tend to mix our MIDI drums like live drums. And I think a lot of this has to do with YouTube, actually. A lot of us will watch tutorials on YouTube of a pro mixer mixing a live drum kit. We'll learn these techniques and then try to apply them to Get Good Drums, Easy Drummer, Superior Drummer, or some other form of MIDI drum software. The problem with this is that MIDI drums are not live drums, and a lot of the results end up sounding very, very plastic, very over-processed, and just not that great. So in this simple tutorial, I'm gonna demonstrate the difference between how you should be mixing your MIDI drums versus mixing live drums. And I'm gonna do a side-by-side comparison between the exact same song that was mixed both with live drums and also with Easy Drummer. So the first version of the song that I'm gonna lay out for you is the live drum version. We're gonna take a listen to the sample and then I'm gonna dive deep and share with you some of the settings that I have going on the live kit. Then we're gonna flip over to the Easy Drummer version and I'm gonna share with you some of the settings that I have going on in the Easy Drummer version and how they differ and why they differ. So let's check out the live drum version. So this was a production that was recorded in my project studio with a basic 8-channel interface, and I'm not even using drum samples. The drums are 100% natural. Now, when you're recording live drums, whether it's in a nice fancy studio or a project studio, it doesn't really matter. The thing you have to keep in mind is that most of the time the sounds are 100% raw. 100% raw for real, meaning there is absolutely no processing, especially if you're recording into an interface where it's just microphone plugged into interface, captured into your DAW, which is the case here in this mix. So for example, if we look at some of my EQs here, on my kick drum, I have some pretty drastic EQ. Remember, this track is just a simple microphone placed in the kick drum, and this is the EQ that was required for me to achieve the sound that I wanted. Now right here is the EQ that I had on my snare drum. But more importantly, let's take a look at how much gain reduction is taking place within the compressor on my snare drum. So I have about 12 to 18 dB of gain reduction on my snare top mic. But again, remember, this sound was 100% raw at the source. And just to show you how raw it was, I'm gonna actually bypass all the plugins on this snare drum so you can hear what it actually sounds like in solo in its raw state. So as you can hear, extremely raw, you hear cymbal bleed, you hear all kinds of stuff. That's a byproduct of recording live drums. So as you can see, I had to be pretty heavy-handed with the processing to achieve the sound that I wanted. Again, this was recorded in a basic Project Studio with just a handful of microphones into my simple 8-channel interface. And this type of processing is extremely common when recording live drums. But here's the problem. Most of us are using MIDI drums. So if we try to apply these mixing techniques to MIDI drums, the results aren't going to be that great. So let's jump over to the Easy Drummer version of this exact same production and look at some of the processing that I have going on in that version. Let's take a listen. Okay, so this mix right here is the exact same mix. The only difference is that instead of me using live drums, I've replaced all of the live drums with a basic recording of Easy Drummer. And I'm just using the stock Easy Drummer sounds. Now, as far as workflow, I prefer to export all of my individual MIDI drums to audio. So if we look here, these are actually my MIDI drums. They have just been exported to individual audio tracks, which in my opinion is extremely important if you want to produce professional sounding results in a pro mix when using MIDI drums. And I highlight this fact in the MIDI drums and Amp Sims production checklist, which again, you could click the link below and download right now. So let's go over the exact same two components that we went over in the last version of the mix with the live drums. The first thing is our kick drum. If you look here, way less processing, hardly any EQ at all. The only thing I'm doing is just pulling out a little bit of top end. Now, the question is, why is it so different? Why am I doing so much less processing on my MIDI drums versus the live drums? The answer is simple. MIDI drums are already processed. You gotta remember that these companies do an amazing job of making these products sound good right out of the box. So there's no reason to go in there and do crazy EQ cuts and boosts if the sounds are already compressed and EQ'd at the source. Most people don't realize this, but it's true. Now, yes, certain MIDI drum software is supposed to sound more raw than others, but I've yet to hear any version of MIDI drum software that's 100% raw. And what I mean by this is source files that sound just like raw files recorded out of a home studio or out of a studio where live drums were tracked. If it exists, I haven't heard it yet. And up next, let's take a look at our snare drum. Again, way less processing than the live drum version. And now let's look at how much gain reduction I have going on in my compressor in my snare drum. Again, in the MIDI drum version of the exact same performance. As you can see, hardly any compression at all. And the reason why is the actual sound from Easy Drummer was already heavily compressed. Again, most people don't realize this, but it's true. And to prove my point even further, remember how raw that snare drum sounded from the live drums version. Let's take a listen to this snare drum from Easy Drummer in solo in its raw state. Let's check it out. Night and day from the live drum version. You can clearly hear that it's already pre-EQ'd and has a ton of compression added to it at the source, which in my opinion is a good thing. This is why these products sound so good right out of the box, and you can get right to creating great results with minimal tweakage. So that's the key takeaway here. When you're mixing your MIDI drums, they're gonna require way less work, way less EQ, sometimes even no EQ and no compression to achieve the exact same results that you would achieve with live drums that you recorded in a studio or even your home studio. And the one thing that I hear all the time when people send me mixes are snare drums that sound really weirdly spiky, or toms that sound overly plasticky, or drums that sound just overly compressed. Because again, these mixes are utilizing MIDI drums where I could hear whoever mixed it was trying to mix them as if they were mixing live drums, which is not the way to do it. So I'm curious to know, are you guilty of this yourself? Do you dive into your MIDI drum tracks and add a ton of compression and a ton of EQ because you've watched tutorials on YouTube on how to EQ and compress drums that were maybe tutorials geared around live drums? I'm curious to know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your opinion. And again, if you're looking to improve the results with your own productions out of your home studio or utilizing MIDI drums and amp sims, you could have direct access for absolutely free to my MIDI drums and amp sims production checklist. Just click the link below and download the PDF guide, again, for absolutely free. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. And until next time, happy mixing.